going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of JaAR. JaAR, for those of you that may be new, stands for Joe
and Amy
Review. This is our weekly show where we review the Magic stories. And this week we are here with Chapter 14, which may seem weird because last week we were here with Chapter 15. But last week was weird because we had no idea that when we were reviewing Chapter 15 that we had only the week before reviewed Chapter 13 and not 14 because Joe can't count. I mentioned in the tweet that, Joe and Amy can't count. It actually had nothing to do with Amy at all. It was totally my fault, so I do apologize to all of you, to you, Amy, and to myself that happened. But if you're watching this later on, way later on in the playlist, I will have fixed that. So you will be none the wiser, except that I just told you.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, if you're watching this week of, and you're surprised that we're doing Chapter 14 before 15, again, apologies. It was a little mistake. I hope that it doesn't ruin everything for you. But it did allow one topic of conversation for today, but we'll get to that. So, this week we are here to review Chapter 14 of The Gathering Storm by Django Wexler. My quick review at the top is I liked this one. It was really cool. There was some cool fight scenes, some cool character development between three of the main characters from these stories in Ral, Kaya, and Vraska. More so Ral and Vraska, but a little bit of Kaya as well. Yeah. I liked it, and I mean you had some key secondary players showing up and then going away forever in certain instances. So yeah, I really enjoyed this one. I think it's super heavy action packed and definitely one that's not to be missed.
Okay. Yeah, I would agree. It's definitely one that's not to be missed. I did like it a lot, but I still have to say, regardless of the fact that Vraska is one of my favorite characters and actually got to do something of note in this one, last week's story, which is really 15,
the next one,
I still feel was better than this one.
That's fair. That's very fair. And it again, we hadn't looked at this one prior, but it felt like it wasn't next week's story, Chapter 15, or the next story, wasn't super impacted by Chapter 14.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Although again, there's one exception. We'll talk about that in a bit. But that's fair. I don't think that you're oh my God, Amy, what's wrong with you? To think that, or to feel that Chapter 15 was better than 14, especially. Again, noting, if you haven't watched 15 yet, that 15 was a lot more intrigue-based, whereas this one was a lot more action and fighting-based.
Right.
So it is different things. Now, do you think that, objectively it was better, or is it because you prefer that kind of storytelling?
It's because I prefer that type of thing. And
that's fine, right? It's important to know... I'm just asking, let's explore our biases, that kind of thing.
To use that as a gauge.
Yeah, that's fair.
Versus, that story just clearly was better.
Right.
It's not that. It's I prefer political intrigue over, fighting.
Just straight fighting. Well, and that's something to be aware of then in terms of a recommendation is that if you are that kind of a person as well where you prefer political intrigue, then Chapter 15 you're probably going to enjoy a little bit more. But if you are ew, political intrigue, no thank you, then this one would probably be more your speed. But regardless...
I guess it's less intriguing. I think it's just political.
Yes, just badly, annoyingly political. But, so that is our quick review up at the top. Yeah, that is our not so quick review up at the top, in fact, which is totally fine. But those are our opinions on the story ahead of time. So if you've not had a chance to read it, I suggest you Google The Gathering Storm by Django Wexler. You should be able to find the chapters, read Chapter 14, and then come back here, of course. We would love for you to join us and give us your opinions and or how they may compare and contrast with ours.
Or with Chapter 15, why not?
Or with Chapter 15, why not?
The funsies of it, since we messed it up.
Yeah. I kind of wanted to do a heavier topic at the top, mainly because it goes along with the order that this story was told in. We start with a little bit of what seems like foreshadowing to the fact that Mazarek is, not doing great for Vraska right now. And that led me to a question. because Amy, I asked you when we were reading this story if you remembered when we first saw in the stories Mazarek. And the answer is during Commander Stories. We reviewed it. It's out there. It's a JaAR. You should definitely watch it. It was a very good story, and we really enjoyed
it's only partially open.
What? Yeah, and the commander story that was told was because Mazarek was one of the commanders from that set of commander decks that came out, and the story was great. It speaking of foreshadowing, it foreshadowed our return to Ravnica, so to speak, because it was set on Ravnica. It referenced Vraska. We had been seeing Vraska with regard to Ixalan and Rivals of Ixalan, and now it was talking about her connection back to Ravnica again, which was a really great way for the storytellers, the story team, if you will, at that time, sure, or to be like, hey, by the way, let's not forget that Ravnica exists, because you might need to know that. It might become relevant at some point.
Yeah.
And it did. And yet, that story was written by the team. Actually, I think that story may not have been the full team, but I know that Alison Lures had, if it was not entirely her, it was at least partially her. So this was back when in-house writers were writing these stories, as opposed to contracted authors like a Django Wexler or a Greg Weisman or a Nikki Drayden or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm not trying to say one way or another which was better or worse. I feel like I have an opinion, but it has nothing to do with the writers themselves. It has to do with who the story team is within the company and the decisions that I feel that they're making. And so that's why I wanted to bring it up. Because now you have the story that we read about Mazarek was Mazarek very, very, very friendly with Vraska, the commander story. Very friendly and close with her, because Vraska understood Mazarek and the Krall's plight of being a member of the Golgari that was not fully understood and not fully appreciated by the Dev Karen leaders and JaAR and etc. And they were very close, and they were very intellectual with one another in terms of the things that they did and what they enjoyed. It was a great story to show off that relationship. And now these stories, the Gathering Storm stories, seem to just show Mazarek as kind of an asshole and not listening to Vraska at all. It doesn't reference back to their friendship one iota. Right. It just talks about Mazarek as like someone who's there as a member of the Krall, and it's basically like Zedek, who kind of takes over what would be the Mazarek role, and has Mazarek as just a jerk. And that...
Right, and it doesn't even, reference. It doesn't even have a callback or a flashback.
That's what I'm saying, exactly.
It mentions, the evolution from one to the other.
Right.
If they wanted to try to explain away why point A is over here and point B is all the way over here.
Right.
There's just no connection whatsoever.
Yeah. And it sucks, because I feel like, again, I've talked about this, and again, exploring our biases, I have mentioned many times how much I despise the way that Zedek was used to bring Vraska's memories back to her, and the way in this story, as well as in this chapter, as well as a couple of the others, how they're attempting to explain away and retcon the information and the relationship with Jace and Vraska. It's very heavy-handed, and with combining it with this Mazarek stuff, it just seems like the current story team is just trying to wipe away every bit of world building that Allison and then subsequently the rest of she and her team put together in the lead up to this big finale with Nicol Bolas in every way possible. And it's, in my opinion, and maybe it's just my opinion, but I find it actually infuriating. It really makes me mad. Because I'm reading this and I'm like, Django Wexler is such a good writer. And so you brought in a good writer to write good stories, and then it seems like you're also like settling grudges at the same time.
Right.
And it's sad and pathetic, and it's like I don't know if like you just don't like them, if you don't like the way that they wrote their stories, or if you're like trying to pardon my language here, but are you getting into a dick measuring contest? Like, I don't understand what the rationale is behind taking all of these stories that people enjoyed and that had a very clear thread.
Right.
And
a meaningful one.
Yes. Yeah, because it wasn't just like, oh, whatever, it's this crappy storyline, let's get rid of it. It was a meaningful storyline that people were invested in and cared about. And it just seems malicious in the way that it's just being rewritten in like every facet for no reason at all.
Right.
Excuse me.
And it's not being, I mean, as we've said, it's not being rewritten to replace it with something better.
Right.
It's being rewritten seemingly for the sake of rewriting it.
Yeah. Again.
Like you said, like it's a dick measuring contest. Like to sit there and say, well, you as a person suck, and you wrote this, so it doesn't matter how good it was, I'm gonna shit all over it.
Well, or even vice versa. Just like, hey, you were the old group, everybody talks about how much they loved you, well, I'm better than you, and look at what I can do. Yeah. I can make your stuff go away. And it's so frustrating. And I think frustrating is like the bottom end of what it is.
Right.
Like I said, I think it's upwards of infuriating. Like, it's so distracting from what should otherwise be a very good and enjoyable story.
Not just that, but it's insulting.
Yeah, disrespectful.
To those of us who care about following the story and having a continuous through line, to just kind of throw continuity to the wolves and just, let it fall where it may. I mean...
Yeah. And I do want to point out, right, I mean, we're saying these things as if they are fact because there are our opinions and it's our show. I don't know what the hell's going on with my voice today. I apologize. But these are our opinions and it's our show. And so if you have a differing opinion, especially if you're new to JaAR and don't know that this is how we do things, we would love to hear from you. If you disagree with us and you think that it does make sense and that we're overlooking it because maybe we did enjoy it back then, and you think that this is a better direction to take it, we would love to hear from you.
Yeah.
We're not looking to get into arguments, but we would love to hear the other side because we genuinely don't see it. It just seems like we're saying, malicious intent behind why these stories are being retconned. As opposed to what I would argue would be somewhat forgivable were if it were somewhat of a misstep previously, and then it were course corrected by retconning, and that it was done to improve it in some way, and or to fix a continuity error or something like that, and that's why you retconned it. But instead it seems like you're just doing it for the sake of erasing the main story threads that happened before, because either you don't agree with them, or what I'll say, because I'm so upset by it, you're not talented enough to follow up with it appropriately, and so you have to go your own way because you cannot properly follow up on what's being said. That's my opinion, and again, I'd love to hear contrary or...
It kind of really does seem that way.
Yeah.
Because what they're rewriting over it with is significantly less meaningful. I won't say it's bad, but it's significantly less meaningful.
Yep.
And shallow, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's a lot of other things going on with that I really don't want to get into at all. Maybe it's a video in and of itself, but I genuinely would really just rather not touch it. Amy and I have discussed it privately, and and we've read a lot of the things that have been discussed online about it. But in terms of the people who are on the franchise story team right now, that's about the extent of what I'm going to say. If it's a discussion that you would like to begin in the comments, you are more than welcome to. But that's really not something I'd like to devote JaAR time to.
Right.
But
it doesn't deserve to have any time
right,
devoted
right.
to it.
But yes and no.
It does, but it doesn't.
Exactly. And I'm not going to take time on our videos and on our channel to do that. But realize where the focus was and where it shifted to.
Right.
That's what I'll say, and that's as far as I'd like to go with that. And again, if you'd like to talk about it in the comments, you're more than welcome. We would love to hear from you, and we would love to have you express your opinions in that way. On to the rest of the review. I apologize that it started off like that, but it really was something that I noticed immediately because they really just showed that Mazarek stuff right at the top. So I wanted to talk about that. Then we can talk about, unless there was more that you wanted to talk about on that topic. Okay. I didn't think so, but I wanted to give you your time in just in
Less
case.
I wanted to talk about
That's
on the
fair.
topic.
So, okay. So then we can talk about Chapter 15 for a bit. Because Chapter 15, welcome to it. We accidentally read it last week, and now we're here this week reading this one. There's the moment where we cut to Ral and Kaya walking through and walking up to this fight in this city of Greg-Ospen. And they bond a little bit more, I think, than we've seen them bond in their previous encounters, but still, they have bonded, but this seemed more so. They seemed more comfortable with one another, more willing to be joking around with one another, and things like that. It was nice to see two of these main characters becoming more friendly. And yet, in Chapter 15, is when we get the comment from Ral regarding Kaya when talking to Tomek, where he says that she is an ally and not which he says in a way to imply that he is not her friend, right. Or vice versa, whatever. That they're not friends; they are only allies.
Yeah, but you also kind of have to take into account the fact that maybe he considered Vraska a friend.
That's absolutely...
And very much realized that he can't do that.
That's correct. And I'm almost certain that's why. All I'm saying is I'm pointing to the fact that they start this chapter with these two bonding, right, and having this moment together, only to follow in the next chapter with, even after that kind of a relationship and that kind of those kinds of interactions with one another, it still follows immediately after with Ral saying, she's an ally. And that seemed like kind of a big moment, especially with the way that Tomek responded to it,
right.
In terms of, their relationship as well. And so it led me to, and we've discussed this in the past, I think with Greg Weisman's book, but it led me to think, is this an example of why it might be beneficial to read this story back in its entirety after you're done with it? Because you will have the benefit of hindsight, knowing the things that are to come when you read the things ahead of time. Because reading this chapter, it's good character work to have Ral and Kaya talking to one another in that way. But if I hadn't read chapter 15 first, if I had waited a week and then read chapter 15 after this, I don't know that it would have been as clear in my mind the interaction that the two of them had at the top of this chapter compared to what Ral says about her during chapter 15.
I think what they were trying to do is give Ral less staticness, which is ironic because it's Ral.
Pun intended. Go on.
But no, I think they were trying to give him an arc of his own where he Ral comes into his own and learns to not be a jerk or whatever, where he had commitment issues and they were really talking about his commitment issues and his trust issues based on all the crap that had happened to him before, right? But they kind of didn't they didn't develop it enough. Like, they really focused on that beginning part, and they didn't develop the sort of space between point A and point B, where you can see him go from this untrusting guy who gets into these relationships with these guys, hoping that it will be a good relationship, and then becoming very disillusioned when it doesn't go that way. And then all of a sudden now he is becoming friends with Kaya and then saying he's not friends with her. There's like a disjointedness there.
Mm-hmm.
They're not carrying through those details that would make you really realize, okay, this is who that character is. Okay, now I understand. Ral is sitting there this whole time feeling this way. Then now he's getting into these sort of weird situations with Tomik, where Tomik is sort of stepping over lines that had been drawn and not crossed for a very long time. And then all of a sudden now he's becoming closer to certain people, and then he's talking about becoming closer to these certain people, and then next thing we know, he's saying he's not that close to those people. And then after that, he comes back through because Tomik says, wait a minute, I'm a little disappointed in you for saying that.
Mm-hmm.
Like he should, right? And
I think he goes a little bit further than that in basically...
Well, the point is,
Sorry.
I think they they almost touched on those things as if they were bullet points instead of carrying them through like a thread.
Mm-hmm.
So each one of those things that I mentioned was a thing that happened, right? They did actually say each one of those things in the stories. It's just that it didn't feel like a cohesive storyline where you see the development of that character. Because it was just like bullet point, bullet point, bullet point, bullet point, bullet point, and then you have to draw that conclusion that it was a character arc.
Yeah.
Instead of just events.
And I hope I didn't gloss over too quickly the point you made earlier, because as you've been discussing and thinking back to it, the point of, Ral having previously trusted Vraska and look at where it got him is a very good point to have brought up. So I think that's very fair.
I really think that's where they were trying to take it, and they just didn't push it quite far enough. To achieve that.
I think that there's it's always a weird balance, right? Because again, we mentioned it last week, chapter 15 as well, in Show Don't Tell, where I appreciate as a reader being able to connect those dots the way that you've done. And maybe that's the bullet points or the dots. You connect those yourself. But you are, it sounds like saying that maybe there's like a half a step in there that's missing to help us get closer to connecting them?
Well, they just feel disconnected. They just feel like they're not that they're not one character, but they're not a character arc. What they're trying to do is make you think this certain way about this certain character. You see them rise up to a certain pinnacle point and then go back down, and they had issues, then they got better, then they had more issues, then they got better, then they, there was a resolution there for that character. Right, they learned
something along the way, yeah.
For that character. That's what they were trying to achieve. But I don't feel that it was clear that they were trying to achieve that. I feel that we have to sit here and speculate that they were trying to achieve that. And if they had achieved it, then this wouldn't even be part of the conversation. But at least if they had gotten it to a point where we're not speculating that they were trying to achieve it, and we knew they were trying to achieve it, and we just felt like they didn't quite do it. But it's like, it's really just, I have to sit here and assume that that's what they were trying to do.
Yeah.
Because there's definitely no definitive proof that that's what they were trying to do.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, and like I said, well, so okay, so let's ask a different question, kind of going off of that, but going off of kind of what I was getting to with the start of that as well, which is, again, knowing that those are the points being made and that's the thread that is attempting to be woven throughout. Do you think that that lends itself to a reread of it once it's done?
It won't change it. So no.
And I guess a different question, but kind of going off of that, is a book or a story in its totality that makes you want to reread it? Because I've experienced that many times, where you get to a twist of some kind and you go, oh man, wasn't that moment back there? Maybe that was supposed to be foreshadowing it or whatever. Is a story that lends itself to being reread and to multiple readings through, is that a measure, not necessarily automatically makes it so, but a measure of a good story?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think a better story is a story that allows you to read it once and understand it.
Interesting.
Without having to read it a second time.
Okay. Because I always...
You can always go back and read something again and get different things out of it than you got out of it the first time. But that's because you're different, not because the story's different.
Mm-hmm.
And reading it right after you've read it the first time is not a way to change in between. What's on the page isn't changing. So, no, I don't think that would benefit you in this case, because I don't see it helping. Okay.
Let us know your thoughts as well, because I think that that's something that I always thought of at least when I was younger and reading stories when I was younger, is that I always loved, like, at the end of the story being like, oh my God, now that I've gotten to the end of the story, I want to read it again, right? I want to go back now that I know what's going to happen and read it now knowing, so that when there are those subtler nods in earlier points of the novel to what is going to happen, or things where you're like, oh man, that makes that line so much sadder when you know that he dies at the end, or something like that. I've always enjoyed that. So to me, that makes a good story. To Amy, it seems like it does not. So I would love to hear other opinions one way or the other, and not to say Joe's right, Amy's wrong, Amy's right, Joe's right. Just out of curiosity, what's your opinion as well? Because I don't think Amy's wrong. I respect her opinion fully. I've always experienced it the other way.
Well, and that's why I prefer the format of a short story to a novel. Because I don't feel that it makes sense to want your readers to have to read your story a second time.
Fair enough.
To get everything.
Yeah, and my rationale with it is it's a book. So once you've read it, what happens to it? If it's a physical representation of a book as opposed to digital, like we're doing with these, you would put it back on the shelf and like never pick it up again, or as you said, pick it up at some time in the future to get something else out of it if you enjoyed it enough. For me, I think that being able to read it through and then just want so badly to read through it again is something that allows it to be more movable on and off the shelf, as opposed to just, I read the book, it goes on the shelf, and I never look at it again or think about it again,
I just am not that way.
That's fair. That's totally fair. And that's why I asked. I would love other opinions as well, whether you agree with one or the other, or if you have a different variation of some kind, because it's actually kind of just an interesting question to me.
I'm not that way, although I'd love to sit here and analyze literature. I mean, that's the whole point of why we do this show. It's not the difference between can we analyze this or can we not analyze this. I'm not sitting here saying I want everything spoon-fed to the point where you can't analyze it. Analyzing it is important. Analyzing it is the reason why it ought to be written, right? But I don't see a lot of value in having to read a story multiple times so that you have everything.
Fair.
You know, I just think it makes more sense to draw enough attention to those Easter eggs, you know.
Mhm.
And maybe drawing less attention to it makes more sense in, say, a movie, because you're seeing it, right? So you can see it, and you'd be like, oh, there's that thing, you know? But in a story, I feel like those Easter eggs have to be a bit more prominent so that you can put your pillars in the right spots to build on top of.
Okay, fair enough.
If those pillars aren't there once, you know, when the story's over and you got to put them back in underneath your roof, that doesn't make sense. Why?
Yeah. All right, fair enough.
That's just a mess.
Fair enough. I really liked the discussion in this story where the dichotomy, when Ral and Vraska are talking to each other, which, by the way, I also want to point out, the second time that Ral is going forth and confronting a planeswalker controlling one of the guilds of Ravnica. That's just a thing that I noticed. He did it with Domri a couple of chapters ago, and now he's doing it with Vraska. And they then follow it up with a surprise attack of some kind against him. So, you know, figure it out, dude. This is just apparently what's going to happen to you from now on. But
right.
Stop. Yeah. So I thought that was fun. But when they actually are talking to each other before the surprise attack, spoilers, Ral warns about Nicol Bolas and says, don't you know what he could do if you let him get away with what he wants to get away with? And Vraska, very intelligently, turns around and goes, what about Niv Mizzet?
Right.
You're doing the exact same thing. Now, to be fair, we all know that Niv Mizzet and Nicol Bolas are on very different playing fields. Right. Very different. Although, and again, there's the nod to what is about to happen, where Vraska says that what Ral is doing is going to give Niv Mizzet godlike abilities. Well, it's the other way around. But obviously, they don't really know that fully, whereas we do.
Well,
so
and
benefit
at
of hindsight.
the same time, how much of that is her belief in what she's saying, and how much of it is her saying something as a jab so that he'll leave her alone?
Yeah. Well, and right,
know?
Right, or right, just saying like, just give, like, go away,
right,
like leave us alone.
If you're doing something bad, I walk up and point out that you're doing something bad, but you don't want to stop, then you're going to throw something in my face. You know?
Right.
Well, how about that time that you did something bad?
Turn it around on you, even though, well, right. And
some stupid shit.
No, that's fair. I mean, it's definitely fair. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Again, we had another instance in this story, which I really enjoy, of where we're with a character, they're dealing with a threat, and they're doing well dealing with that threat. For example, in this instance, I'm discussing Vraska. She and Zedek and Mazarek are fighting through the Thralls and the Knights.
Yeah.
And the groups of Thralls come in, and between the two Krall and Vraska, they deal with them somewhat easily, seemingly. And then the Knight comes in. And Vraska has a bit of a tougher time with the Knight. Big dude, big sword. Her saber's not doing a ton, but it's able to block it a little. But he's able to kind of get closer here and there. And she eventually, through fighting, is able to get in close enough to turn him to stone. And so you have the easier Thrall, the more difficult Knights, and then it immediately follows that with the Mizium constructs that come through the bust through the hole, or the collapsed rocks and fungus, and come through, and Vraska is like completely out of her element and shocked and has no idea what to do. And because of that, again, as the stories, I think something that I really enjoy that the stories do is there's this big moment of like, oh no, what's going to happen to her? What's going to happen next? And it cuts back to Ral Zarek again. Now, to be fair, I was a little upset because we don't see those Mizium things again with regard to Vraska, right? We don't see those constructs in Vraska duke it out at all. We don't hear how well they do, but it seemed to be pertinent enough that it was the point where they decided to cut back to Ral again, which usually means, hey, this is kind of a tougher thing. And when I read it, I said to myself, you know what they're probably doing is they're probably giving you as much as they can so that you will root for the person whose perspective you're getting in that moment. So you're supposed to start rooting for Vraska versus the Thrall and the Knight and etc. But now these Mizium constructs come out. She's going after Ral, who got surprise attacked and is running away. And now it's going to cut back to Ral, because now it's time for Ral to get the upper hand, and he's going to start winning. So that was what I immediately thought of there, is like, you know, it had to cut away from Vraska, because now she was in a more difficult spot. And again, then it cuts to Ral now dealing with his accumulator is starting to run low, and Vraska has a really good strategy to fight him in sending all the undead after him, one after another, or multiples at the same time, so that he runs out of energy, cannot recharge that energy, and then has to fight Vraska and or Mazarek and or Zedek. And again, but at that point you're already rooting for Ral because you're back with him again. So I thought that that was interesting too, because you have two main characters who have been main characters in this story now going head to head, but this is still a way for you as the reader to still root for each one individually, because you're hearing that story from their perspective. I thought that was a cool way to do that.
Yeah.
And especially for me, we've talked about this sometimes on this show, that I, seemingly more so than you, you're more aware that there are gray areas. And I'm like, no, I want to know who the bad guy is. Like, tell me who the bad guy is. And so, this was a good way of doing that for simple old me, as opposed to, you know, just letting it be a gray area. They kind of were like, okay, very easy. You root for the person who you're hearing from in that moment. So
right.
I again.
Well, that is a gray area, right?
Yeah.
Because it switches.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't always stay, well, this one person is bad and everyone else is good. You know, it's not really like that.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, in my opinion, better writing, because that reflects real life.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's not all black and white. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's fair. That's definitely a fair thing. To finish this up, there were two other points. First, I was confused. Maybe everybody else was not confused. But I talked about it with Amy, and it seemed like we kind of both were. There are options, and we weren't sure which one was which. The priest, the Orzhov priest that fights Kaya. Now, in chapter 15, right, benefit of hindsight, now that we screwed up big time, chapter 15 seems to show that Kaya now knows that there are people within the Orzhov who just straight up want her dead. And that happens right here at the end of this story, or near the end of this story, where the priest comes up, and instead of fighting the Kral and the Golgari, she is fighting Kaya instead. And says, you know, you're a blight on the Orzhov, and we're going to kill you, and a lot worse, more flowery language. If you haven't read it, read the story, because it's pretty cool. But then Kaya's fighting her, and she dies with like a linger of death magic. Like Kaya's like got her knife to her throat, like she got the better of her, and then she dies with death magic. Now, earlier in this story, we saw something wither away from death magic that was done by Mazarek. And it was done to save Vraska. It was done with thralls and etc. So I thought to myself, I was like, oh, okay, so one of the Kral killed her. But, you know, probably specifically Mazarek, but whatever. The death magic was used to kill her. But Kaya's just like, oh, great, and just turns around and walks away. That doesn't make sense to me. Why wouldn't she then be afraid that that death magic was to then be used on her?
Well,
Unless...
Well, it seemed like she knew where it was coming from.
Right, but if it was coming from that was kind of the discussion that Amy and I had, that you and I had, was it that a Kral like Zedek, who can read minds, can he also control people's minds? So was he controlling her, and then when Kaya started getting close and asking too many questions, he just killed her with death magic? I was very confused as to what was going on in that moment. And again, maybe I'm just not seeing it. Maybe it was super obvious. Maybe it was Kaya's like shadow blades or whatever, and that's what killed her, and I just didn't read that part where like she turned the blade slightly and into her throat or whatever. Maybe I missed it, but the other option that you brought up was, do you recall?
No.
Oh, that it could have been Bolus. Because
Right.
we've been seeing so many people controlled by Bolus, and he is a part black mage, because he's Grixis, so he could also, and almost certainly also, has death magic. So was it a pawn of Bolus coming forth to kill her, like in the chaos? Yeah. And that, again, when Kaya started asking too many questions, he used his death magic to kill her. I was very confused. And
yeah, I felt like it was Nicol Bolas.
I felt like it was
killed
Mazarek.
her because she was not doing well against her.
Right.
And then Nicol Bolas was going to show up and have a whole conversation with Kaya. But that part didn't happen. So now I don't know.
Right. Well, interestingly, like, you thought it was Bolus. I thought it was Mazarek or Zedek or some combination thereof of the Kral. But it also complicates things, because then when you think about Chapter 15 and the fact that Kaya now in Chapter 15 knows that there are people that want to kill her, maybe it was just the priest from the Orzhov wanting to kill her because people in the Orzhov guild want to kill her. So I was very confused. If you have insights, please, I would love to hear them and be less confused. And as I said, there were two things. So this is the second and the final. Really quick, because I'm not gonna, first of all, we're not summarizing, and second of all, there's not much more to say. I thought that the part at the end with Aurelia was badass. I really enjoyed it. She came in, she was a badass battle angel, and she dealt with Vraska and Zedek pretty handily. Right? I mean, Vraska, sure, was able to get away, but regardless, she's a battle angel. You can tell that she's very battle tested, and was easily able to dispatch Vraska.
Yeah.
And I liked that. It made perfect sense, because it was a way to show that Aurelia is a lot stronger and better than Vraska at that type of fighting, hand-to-hand combat. But it also Aurelia didn't immediately like chop off Vraska's head or whatever. Like, there was still something that happened, and then it was just Zedek who, kind of got bisected there a little.
Yeah, I don't like that it was just Zedek. Zedek was supposed to be Vraska's right-hand man, and then it was the whole stupid trope of, get away, I'll take the hit.
I'll sacrifice myself. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
No. Bullshit. Fucking bullshit.
Okay, fair enough. So yeah, I mean, they're cliches. That's for damn sure.
No, I hated it.
And again, like I said, it really does seem like Zedek was playing the Mazarek role that Allison had originally written Mazarek to be, which is the close friend, confidant, companion, even though we didn't know who Zedek was before this story, because they added him in for reasons. It brings a full circle back to what we were talking about at the beginning. Let us know your thoughts on that in the comments. I'm not going to get into it again because, my God, we've talked about it already.
Right.
But that's going to be it, unless you had anything else for this story. I think that's it. We have now fixed our mistakes next week. Even though this was Chapter 14, next week we'll be here with Chapter 16.
Yes.
I encourage you, if you did not see Chapter 15, it's already out, so feel free to watch it no matter when you're watching this one.
Right.
Chapter 15, our review of that already exists, so definitely go check it out on the channel. Definitely go check out all of the videos on our channel.
Please.
We've been doing a draft of MTG Arena. We started it, our first one for Throne of Eldraine. If you're unaware of how this channel works, I, as a more experienced player, am working with Amy as a less experienced player, going through MTG Arena as the new game and system, or whatever you want to call it, to play these formats. And, we've done some sealeds for our preview streams, our sponsored preview streams. but this was our first draft of the set, and we took our time with it. So it's a little bit of a longer video. It is just the draft. The games will be coming up later, or the matches. So we encourage you to stay tuned and watch those. But if that's something that interests you, like I said, it is a longer video, but we do go through all of our picks and why we picked them, and etc., and the reasonings behind it. And we would love to hear your opinions on what you think we did right, what you think we did wrong. If you think my rationale for things was off and I was giving Amy bad advice, I would love to hear any and all opinions that you have on that. Again, this is JaAR. We would love to hear your opinions on JaAR and on the story, on our opinions and our discussions in the comments below. We would love to hear from you on Facebook and Twitter. Those links are in the description. And last but not least, because I'm rambling on now, we have a video game channel as well. Those videos will be popping up around here, and the subscribe buttons for this channel and the video game channel will be here as well. We do a lot of things. So thank you all.
Or we're beginning to do quite a lot of things.
Yes. There's more to come, I assure you. So, to all of you, thank you genuinely so very much for watching. We really hope that you enjoyed this one. And yeah, that's going to be it. Like I said, lots of things that we do, lots of things that you do. We would love to hear from you, because Amy already kind of said it earlier, but it is a good way to join us in showing off your
Hashtag Vorthos Pride.
Even though you said it before, I wasn't going to let you not say it again.
Thank you.
So you're very, very welcome. So thank you once again. And for us here, this has been another episode of JaAR here on Geek for All, now the Geek for All family of channels. And as we always say, in whichever video of ours you watch next, we will see you all next time. Thanks, everybody.